I'm Eric. This is Scott. This is episode 27 of the Backlash podcast. It is our 1 year anniversary, Scott. How excited are you for this show?
I am more excited than I was for Super Show.
Yeah.
We just finished watching, yeah,
we're fresh off of that. It was okay.
Yeah, we got up at 4:30 this morning, watched the show. It was pretty well what we expected. No real storyline advancements. The hometown heroes won. All the champions retained. Except Buddy Murphy, who was the hometown hero.
Yeah.
That overrode the storyline advancement, but whatever.
So right now we're going to cut to a special video we had done. So we'll go right to that.
Hey, this is WWE superstar Kevin Owens. Hopefully you knew that already. On May 25th in Barrie, Ontario is the North American Championship for the WWE Raw deal. Proceeds go to the Canadian Cancer Society, so please be there and support it.
Thank you very much to our guests. So that was a special announcement for the upcoming event. I'm going to announce two prizes. So we have a Rusev and a Kevin Owens signature. These are the professionally printed on both sides, and it's going to be a backstage signature signing appearance. No, backstage signature and a backstage signing appearance. One from each of those are going to be in the prize pool. I expect more announcements in November for what the full prizing is for the May North American Championship event. How excited are you, Scott?
I'm excited. I'm already thinking about decks, even though we'll have a set or two drop before that. But yeah, we were talking about Raw deal a lot during the Super Show, so I'm excited.
Well, yeah, during Super Show, we have a friend of ours he hasn't played any virtual, and he got out of Raw deal before Revolution hit. And he's like, I want to build Randy Orton, which I think is a great superstar for someone coming and doing virtual Raw deals to play. So when you get four people who all have different ideas for a Raw deal deck, it makes for pretty entertaining.
Yeah, so we're like, cut this card, use this strategy, do this, do that. But it was entertaining.
The other thing about Orton, though, is like he's pretty basic, where his first European uppercut, it's the first card played is a chain multi. So all he wants to do is like, I just want to hit people with big European uppercuts. So like we have him up to 11 damage with pre-match cards alone, and then 17 with the Orton actions, the fully evolved. So it's going to be a fun deck for him to play.
Yeah, so looking forward to that. Getting him on board.
Yeah, we just recently last weekend had a round robin event. You want to talk about your experience in that?
Sure. I was playing Best Wrestler in the World. It's a bash deck because he has a specific that gets 1 fortitude, so it's a 3 bash fortitude. And specific, you start the game with 4 fortitude, which I really like. My biggest issue with bash decks is that they don't have any 0 fortitude multi-reversals. So once you get to 4 fortitude, you get the F-outs. So I really like that deck. He searches for 5 moves right off the top, so you pretty well have moves for the first 5 turns of the game. Or you can strategize and get some trademarks and save them for later in the game, which I found myself doing. I'd put Go to Sleep in the backstage area so that if my opponent played See How It Feels, they couldn't use Go to Sleep on me and potentially win via the text without me having the opportunity to do it first. Like, no. But yeah, he's a really versatile deck, really fun. Basically throws a bash punch or a German suplex first turn, because you get to see their hands, so you know what reversals they have. Maybe plunge one of those to help get it through, and then start throwing trademarks as soon as possible. And I run pretty well every trademark you can. Dynamic finisher, the finisher. CM Punk has 2 trademark finishers, so bash finisher, See How It Feels, there's a bunch. So yeah, I really enjoy it. It's pretty versatile. I went 2-2 in the games I played.
Well, because you left.
Yeah, I left
for the last round.
So it did pretty well overall. The one game I lost, I was playing a legend who had through all these years, and like after I pinned him, we like all scooped up our cards. He's like, "Oh wait, See How It Feels." So we played it all out and played it out, and he ended up winning. He played a shoot. The submission one, shoot lockup.
Yeah.
And it was successful. I didn't have any reversals. He had not trash talking. The shoot, pretty much straight shoot interview. Not trash talking. Straight shoot interview. He removed the top card of the game. I removed the top 2 cards. It was Revolution and Bash Evader. 2 reversals. And then there were no reversals left in the last 7 cards. I was like, The one weakness with the CM Punk deck is there's like no recovery. I think I run 1 Candace and 1 Cavalry. That's it. So if I don't have those, it's fine. What'd you do?
I ran Brothers of Destruction. It was more of a casual deck. I've been playing competitively for so long that I needed kind of a palate cleanser.
Mm-hmm.
So I ran Interview with Mean Gene and Drawing a Blank, which it made for a pretty fun time. They have a specific research for any amount of specific cards and 1 non-unique card put in your ring side, so I'm getting that whirlwind kick, the 0 for 5 strike assault multi. So turn up the heat into it. Usually it went through, they didn't stop it because they're saving their restricted use for that later Turn the Tide, because you can play it, thanks to Mean Gene, they can't respond to the Turn the Tide. Even if you're higher in value, you can play anything you want. Like you can play it regardless of your fortitude rating. It was a hoot. My standout thing with it is I hit against this Shane McMahon player. He got way ahead of me because his moves are like -4 fortitude. So I kept using their ability to pick up, let me get a shot in, that eventually went through.
Yeah.
And then I kept picking up Simply the Best afterwards. Simply the Best, like away all his fortitude, and ended up getting the pin because of it.
Yeah, nice.
And then at one point I played against Batista, as he beat me big time. But I managed to do a Turn the Tide into a maneuver of doom that all went through, and I recovered 14 cards.
Jeez.
I think I had 11 uniques in the pre-match, and then with some reversals and like a specific in itself, it was a 14 card swing. So that was pretty good. It was just what I needed to kind of get a fresh and fun look on the game. So now I'm like, okay, deck building mode. I mean, we're all moved. We're just organizing the house now, so it's like I can invest more time in it.
Yeah.
Did you have a standout deck in that event where you're like, oh, that's some neat ideas there I hadn't thought of, or hey, this superstar's a lot better? Because it was a mix of half classic based superstars and half virtual superstars.
Yeah, the lowest superstar value was Shane. He's a 3.
Yeah.
I think. And otherwise, it was 5 superstar values or higher. There was Batista, Rattlesnake, 1 iteration of The Rock. I can never remember.
The virtual 5 legend.
Yeah. No, it wasn't the legend.
Yep. Because he used to play sharpshooters at 0.
Years, yeah. So yeah, Rattlesnake was pretty decent because he gets those condemns that he can just search for with his ability. I think that's, or not his ability, his backstage card. That's really good. I played a horrible game against him. We were distracted. We put on wrestling on the TV at that point.
It was the R-Truth dance, dance break.
Dance break. We should have one of those. Dance break! Oh, come on.
I don't got it in
1 year!
I am exhausted from this Australian event.
7 seconds, yeah.
So Rattlesnake was the big standout for you?
Yeah, I wasn't too concerned because you have Scotty Bash that reverse the non-unique actions. But what happened with me, I was like, in my mind, I was like, he's a legend, but Rattlesnake isn't a legend. So I was going to play a shoot lock up from backstage area at 0 fortitude, but it's not 0 fortitude, it's only -5 or something. I don't know the text. It's so early in the morning right now. Not thinking of my raw deal cards. But anyways, I couldn't play the shoot lockup, so I let him get fortitude, even though I had a rebel in my hand. And then he followed up with stomping a mud hole, and I had the bash feud, and I didn't ace that either.
Man.
It just didn't even cross my mind, so I was like, yeah, this game's over. And it was. He just like condemned, and then like discard my hand. I could draw 2 back off of CM Punk's backstage area, but it wasn't enough to do anything when I'm stuck at 0. And his opening hand was like 2 once is enough for the bash punches, the douchebag for German. Like, he had all the reversals in his hand, and I'm just like, this is going to be a rough game. Packed Fortitude Surge, so I couldn't plunge him off the beginning. I think he was the only Fortitude Surge that I saw all day. But, yeah.
I really like Shane McMahon's new card he got that makes his maneuvers -4. So he was playing the non-unique specific he got. It's a 4 for 8, so it's an 0 for 8 that can only be reversed by D0s. It's a strike 4 an object, so like a majority of decks aren't touching it.
Yeah, you can't sidewalk slam it.
It can't sidewalk. You can't reach exceed your grasp because it's superstar specific.
No revo.
No revo. No once is enough, or get the F out because it's not a multi.
Once they get one in ring area, you
What?
can.
But he's getting that 8 fortitude, and then he's just tossing high risks.
Yeah.
So I thought that was good. It was the first game I played, and it was like he got off to like a big lead, and I'm like, holy cow! Like it was really aggressive. Like it was good.
Yeah.
And those are my main thoughts on our little event there. Congratulations to Adam for walking out with our little replica spinner belt that we're using.
He was playing Rattlesnake.
Rattlesnake. Who are you working on right now? Who are you building?
No one.
No one? Well,
I have my Halloween deck, my Halloween themed deck. I have Luke Harper built, so I'll play him for the Halloween one. And yeah, we'll see where it goes after that. I know holidays come up and then it's pretty busy. But
Yeah, it's Canadian Thanksgiving this weekend. So, busy weekend. Our event's on the 20th. I'm not going to be able to work on my deck until starting Tuesday. I'm building Umaga. Because I'm building it with the ECW Allegiance and the throwback title belt, so all of his maneuvers are +2, his opponents are -2. His ability makes his opponent's maneuvers -3. So -5 to my opponent's maneuvers.
Nice.
And then with his, he has a backlash mid-match action that gives +1 to moves, so he gets +3, opponents to -5. So I'm gonna be tossing clumsies and elbows. It's gonna. I'm taking
Bring
more,
an elbow back. Yeah.
Bring it elbow back. I'm taking a more relaxed approach with it. I'm not going to do Revolution of the Minds. I'm going to do no cells, oversells, probably raw and readies. Just have some fun with it.
Yeah.
And if you dress like a wrestler, we're giving away candy. It's our trick or treat. So stay tuned for that. We didn't record any matches at our last event, so you will not see any of that, but we're going to get videos back up for this upcoming event. Anything else? Raw deal?
I think that's pretty well all the content that we had stirred up for this episode
So
because we had a lengthy interview with Mike Foley.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. We'll cut to that shortly. Do you want to end the show with that? Just
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we have our contest still going. We will announce winners on the next episode, which will be episode 28.
Take pictures of your Backlash card collection. I only had 5. I think you had 6 or 7.
6 or 7. You can see a peek of what
Someone
the
had
alternate art
got
is in
out
there.
25 of them sitting around. But.
And then we'll just pick random people. I think we'll pick 3 people. We're not eligible.
Okay.
And I'll mail them out to the winners. And in this highest stack of cards.
Yeah.
We'll send you something fun too. But that is a pinned message on the Backlash Podcast Facebook page. Check that out. Yeah, we'll go to the interview.
Alrighty. Celebration. Enjoy the interview. See you in 2 weeks for the first episode of year 2 of the Backlash Podcast.
All right, everyone. I have the pleasure to have with me here today Mike Foley, co-creator of Raw Deal. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you? Thanks for bringing me on. I appreciate it, Eric.
Oh, I appreciate more you giving up the time to be able to come and discuss the game. We were just speaking a bit earlier, and I haven't seen you with much of an opportunity over the years when the game was actively developed to kind of hear your thoughts on things. So figure, why not take the time to chat with you about the game a little bit? Is there anything in particular you want to open up with about your experiences and time with the game?
Well, that guy Baron Vangertoft, he's a big dude. If anybody saw him at any of these conventions, being in the shadow of this big fella, you just you worked over in the shadow. You didn't really need to get out there in the open because he was great with working with the fans. And the funniest thing I can open with was that Baron had basically never really had done much internet stuff. When we started the game, he goes, I remember coming back from a meeting, he goes, well, I'm going to set up something on the Yahoo chat group, and we can kind of get some people to start playtesting this. So he learned as he went. And, he ended up just kind of loving to go on there and read stuff. And I would be like, geez, there was one of our playtesters, John Brulé from up in Massachusetts. He was a big tournament guy early on, and we brought him into playtesting. And John would go on with a paragraph or two long of an analysis of a card. And I'm like, he's doing great stuff, but I go, he needs to learn how to edit some of this stuff. So, but Barron would just sit there and read it, and he enjoyed it. And that was one of the assets that Barron had. He just was very quick at reading stuff and absorbing all of the information. And hence he brought a lot to the game in helping me out, because it started out without him. I don't know if a lot of people ever realized that I brought him in mainly because he was a wrestling fan and he knew about me through a card game group here in town. And so it was interesting getting him on board, and it really helped propel the game further than I thought it was ever going to go.
What inspired you to want to start this game in the first place? I mean, the mechanics are really solid, but was it always attached to wrestling?
Well, yeah. My original role was I worked at World Wrestling, and I worked in product development there. And the situation was they were always looking for different ideas. And being a bit of a gaming nerd, I kind of would offer them ideas, and they didn't know what I was talking about. And I said that this game Magic the Gathering was out there, and it was something that was a card-based game and also collectible, but we really couldn't sell trading cards very well, like baseball cards, because we weren't, a true sport. So I said, this is kind of a combination of both. Some people might want to collect the cards, some people might want to play it as the game. So they didn't know what I was talking about. And people that I worked with, we got in contact with a company called Thunder Castle, which originally made the Highlander game. And they were having, I guess, some financial trouble because we had got them under contract. They were going to do the game. They sat on it for over a year. Everybody liked the Highlander game. I thought it was probably a nice company that actually could kind of take something from a sword fighting game into a wrestling game, but they never even really proposed anything, and I don't know what transpired over there. I just know that they had some financial trouble, and then the license was lost after they didn't do it, anything after the year. So I was working with Comic Images doing trading card stuff, and I said to them, hey, Thunder Castle didn't do anything. Would you guys like to try to put together a game? And they said, well, we did something years ago, but we really don't know anything about collectible cards. So there's a lot of other facets of dealing with collectible cards compared to just doing trading cards. There's a whole, support, and you saw how the game operation with tournaments and store support and stuff like that was a necessary component. So in talking to Comic Images, they agreed to start something out. And what ended up happening was a guy that I knew, Mike Fitzgerald. He was in our card game group. He had been interested in doing something, so I had discussions with him. And probably a lot of people know that there was a legal problem because Fitzgerald jumped ship during the development of the project, and he tried to get a position with Magic the Gathering and those guys, Wizard, and tried to do a WCW game. Oh. They got into a legal fight with us. And he said that, we were keeping part of, his ideas that he kind of contributed. So in the beginning, there was a lot of stuttering and what have you. They came out with their game. They didn't even put an expansion out. We came out with our game. And a lot of people kind of said, we had stolen, what did we steal? Because if we stole something, we had 25 expansions after that. Did we have not any energy to actually produce a game? So I think there was a rough start there in the very beginning. And because of the situation that we kind of stumbled, I couldn't do it all alone. I was still working at World Wrestling. We lost Fitzgerald, and the situation was, we need, some other help in the design portion of it. So I brought in Barron, who I knew. He basically ran a comic shop. He was in the card group as well at our card shop. And we ended up talking about how we would kind of implement the game. And we did it in a car ride home from New Jersey after we kind of had a meeting with Comic Images. And I remember Barron coming down here on 3x5 cards. He had come down a couple days later, and he's like, okay, I think I put everything together you were talking about. And he was very eager, being the wrestling fan and game, Magic the card game player that he was, to kind of put this together and make it happen. Mm-hmm. So the one thing I said to Barron was in Comic Images is that, wrestling fans they're hyped on the fact that it's wrestling, and they're not really gamer types.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to sell a portion of that game to just wrestling fans, it can't be too complicated. Can't be a lot of little, details and what have you. Come to find out, we would complicate the game further down the road, beyond anything beyond that. But the core of the game is very, like what you had said, was very basic. You got some fortitude, and there was a couple of problems that we had. One of our early playtesters, Jeff Englert, he kind of came back when we were developing, and he had a 10-card hand Triple H deck, and he just threw stuff at us. And because there was no limitation on the number of cards that you could play, there was a problem. Jeff's deck would just kind of unload on you, and it was very difficult to stop. And Baron and I didn't want to kind of change the facet of the hand size. It was one of the components of the game we really wanted to kind of keep. So we ended up, basically, I had a number of ideas of like a Backlash deck originally, but we didn't want to make it too complicated. So we kind of decided we'll keep that after the game kind of gets out of the chute, and we'll see how it kind of develops. So there was a lot of ideas that we had that we left on the table just to keep it kind of simple. And when the game came out originally, a lot of, people that reviewed it said, oh, it's broken. It's got a lot of, things here. But the funny thing is that we had a lot of wrestling fans and other gamer fans that didn't really like wrestling, that just liked the camaraderie and just the subtle nuances that come with the world wrestling and wrestling, personas. Mm-hmm. It was all the trash talking, the local comic shop events and tournaments that got everybody involved. And we actually culminated what was a surprise, was a very close-knit group of players who used to come up to us all the time at tournaments and say, we love playing this game because we've got a lot of buddies. No one's really super competitive. They don't like backstab you like in the other games, like with Pokemon and Magic. Mm. They say everybody's, a super nice group of people. And oftentimes you would see guys that would beat somebody and they would be like kind of coaching somebody on how to play their deck better. Mm-hmm. So they're like, if you're going to play that in this tournament, one of the things that Baron really liked about having the tournament set up where you'd only have one qualifying guy in each superstar slot, because we wanted to have diversity of decks. Mm-hmm. You didn't want to have, Baron and I just did not want to see tournaments like you would see with other games where you would just see the same deck being played all the time. So that was the one thing that I think that really kind of made some of the better players grab a player or a superstar that wasn't played very often, tune it, ratchet up. We throw some cards out after they were playing a bit that might be able to help or augment that superstar. So we'd like to have the diversity in the tournament scene, and it just kind of it went the way it did. And that was the way the game went in many ways. We'd put stuff out, something would be wrong, and the next set, we'd put some bandages on it, fix it, go on to the next, And what was always terrible was I'd show up, go into different places, and we'd play, and I'd always been like about a set and a half ahead of people, and I'd forget how some of the environment kind of was, and I would try to remember. They go, don't you know how to play your own game? I'm like, yeah, I do, but I'm trying to think backwards as to what you might have in your deck, because we hadn't addressed that at the time. So that was one of the components that had kind of transpired as the game got that early start rolling into into the game that it became.
And then it took 3 sets into it, you introduced the Backlash deck, like you had spoken about before. Was there much of a backlash to that idea? I spoke with Mike Canoe a while ago, and he was saying that kind of was a reason why he departed the game. And the current wrestler Xavier Woods, he used to play Raw Deal, and he kind of left as well with the Backlash deck because it was such a big change to everyone. What are your thoughts behind that one?
Eric, that was like Canoe was a dominant player based upon what we would noticed early on. Jeff Englert's original playtest deck and play style was fairly dominant. We knew that it was out there, but I had a Stone Cold deck that was basically a plunge deck that could kind of fend that off, and you could hold up against it. So a couple of early themes played on, but now you don't want to be playing the same thing, years down the road. So you want to kind of introduce new stuff. And we had Mike Canoe in the play group. I don't know if he was in the play group right then, but I remember him kind of. A lot of players like to dominate a game, and when they can no longer dominate a game, then they kind of want to move away from it. So we just introduced a number of new facets to the game, which people wanted. They wanted to have some pre-match stuff, and they also wanted, the backlash was basically a little bit of a curb to someone kind of overloading on them early on, and it was a situation where it was like, should we limit the number of cards you can play in a turn? Well, no, because there might be a lot of convoluted combinations you might want to make. And so we said, well, we'll let it run. And then when you came out with Backlash, there was an immediate Backlash card, which would kind of stop somebody. It worked pretty well. There were, I think it was around, I'm trying to remember what set it was. I remember it was a set around the time when Shawn Michaels was introduced. What set was Shawn in?
Insurrection.
Around that time, it was nearly impossible to get any fortitude on the table. Around that time, it was like there was too many hybrid reversals in decks at that time that could stop a lot of the maneuvers. And it was like whoever got the first amount of fortitude on the table would pretty much win the game.
Yep.
It was a very big standoff time, and that's when I kind of was like to the point where, yeah, we've got some old cards that are a problem in this. And Baron didn't want to ban a lot of the old cards. He said you get people like Mike Canoe that said, geez, I bought all these cards. I want to use them. So you don't want to offend people by changing some of the dynamics and then saying you can't use your cards. So part of our design on the flow was built around, okay, there's some problematic cards in the past. We have to kind of constantly make things that would kind of bandage it as we go forward, because as long as people can play their cards, they're happy. If you introduce new rules, then they adjust to it. But if you tell them you can't use your cards and you ban stuff or you make different sets, we found let's not kind of taint the audience, because we don't want to upset them. They're happy as they are playing it, So that's how that kind of developed. Because as you were saying, the way you had experienced the game, there were several stages of how the game environment kind of changed. And I honestly have to say, once we kind of got past, like, I think it was around Vengeance, Armageddon, we did not have enough playtesting time and funding to really develop a lot of the necessary things that we needed in the game. So we'd see stuff that would come out and would be problematic. And then as we kind of got towards the end there, we pretty much said we had to do a reset. And then that was problematic, because then we had lost a lot of players because it was very complicated as it was. Mm-hmm. And we got towards the end, when we would do the Revolution stuff, it was hopefully to do it for a twofold prong or a threefold prong, where you'd have more players that had kind of left the game, maybe come back. It was kind of streamlined to a point where you could maybe make a conversion to an online type of game, and then also we kind of wanted to get rid of some old cards that were problematic, So, and it was a situation when you have a large backhaul of all of those old superstars. We had a lot of people that really couldn't be used, and World Wrestling didn't want to see the perpetual use of older talent that was no longer on the TV, So.
And we saw actually one big instance of that with Muhammad Hassan was announced in the game. He was quickly shifted out for Gene Snitsky. Now, those earlier sets, you were able to kind of choose who you wanted, who were the big names at that time. Was anyone vetoed by the company in those early sets?
No, I mean, I had originally worked at World Wrestling when we started the game. And so I had a lot of pull with what we could do and what have you. And if you notice, the flavor text on the bottom of the card was real juicy in the beginning, because I was able to pull a lot of stuff that we had from TV. I have to say, one of the bigger things was when the Super Bowl and Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson had the nip slip on TV. That sent a repercussions through the media that was big, because they were going to sue the NFL about what was said on TV. So World Wrestling got a very conservative with a lot of the stuff that they were doing in their programming. It was a big change for them, and they got very, very cautious about putting anything in print that was spicy or over the top. Mm-hmm. So I can't remember what Super Bowl that was, but I remember that was big in a problem with World Wrestling, that a lot of the flavor text got sanitized. that was one of the things, or the card titles got sanitized. That was more of an issue with them than any of the superstars. Usually, they were good at kind of saving a guy that was kind of hot to put in. We wanted a couple of good superstars to put into a new set. And then we started remaking a couple of characters because we wouldn't have that nice top juicy guy. You know, you get down to the bottom of the barrel and you're like, okay, we got Al Snow. He's not going to excite the fans. Okay, so let's redo Rock. Okay, he'll be like the people's champ or whatever. You know, so we always would find a few guys, and you know, Baron, a lot of the guys that are like wrestling fans, they'd always like somebody, you know, that I was just like, oh man, that guy, he's just terrible. And I just remember, who was it? It was Raven. Baron loved Raven, and he was like, oh, I can't wait to get Raven. Yeah, they're not putting Raven in this set because he got nixed a couple of times. But there are a couple of fan favorites that people wanted to see. And, you know, there were, I'm trying to go back there. There were so many of these that we got down to I remember the mystery wrestler was also kind of a bizarre thing where it was going to be Mick Foley. We didn't know if we could do Mick, if he was under contract. So that was like one of the first times where we had kind of an open hole that became like the mystery wrestler. And we thought, well, okay, it could just be the mystery wrestler. We'll just do that because sometimes they had that kind of going on at World Wrestling. So, you know, we had a lot of fun with the programming. That's the one thing I can say that helped perpetuate it, was that it's kind of like the whole Trump presidency, where you've got some material that he puts out. It's like TV programming, like the wrestling programming. It's not like Star Wars. Oh, Decipher's got the license for Star Wars. Okay, so we'll do this whole set on one movie. Okay. You know, what are you going to do for the next? Oh, so the next set's going to be a part of that movie again. Like with us, we had so much material that kept coming each week. It's like a soap opera. You have enough energy there to keep pumping all of the material. It's kind of like one of these things that I'm kind of like thinking of now, where, you know, why don't you do a conversion of Raw Deal with Trump? Why don't you have him fight somebody like Putin or the Little Rocket Man? You know, why not? Why don't you do a conversion? Why don't you do a crowdsourcing or something like that? Maybe we can give something back to these people that played Raw Deal, you know? Since we don't have the license anymore, why don't we keep the game alive doing something else?
Oh, and that's what the virtual sets have been doing. But like you had said with the later sets prior to Revolution, it got more complicated, and that's kind of an issue I'm seeing with newer players now and some of my local players, where it keeps getting more complicated. And unfortunately with Revolution, it came in on a bad note because it was a reset of everything, or it was being said that, yeah, it's completely compatible with this previous stuff, where realistically it wasn't exactly the most compatible.
Yeah.
So with your alternates there, are you thinking of releasing some homebrew Raw Deal or like non-WWE stuff? Like, do you have plans with the mechanics right now, or are you out there?
I have been approached a number of times to try to do something with the game, and none of them really went anywhere because it takes a lot of money. The key thing, you know, Eric, is money. You got to have somebody that's willing to kind of put up the cash. And nowadays, the gaming environment has changed to like a living card game kind of format. Aside from a few, there's not really that many collectible card games that are, you know, viable out there. So, you know, the situation is, you'd have to have a license, you know, to go back to World Wrestling, and that they want a lot of money up front. And now that they're a much bigger operation, you couldn't get a smaller publisher like Comic Images to really, you know, they couldn't put up that much money, you know, to kind of get the rights. Usually it's somebody bigger that's going to somehow to kind of manufacture it. So I wanted to try, since I have the rights to the engine, I wanted to kind of do something. And I've been thinking for a long time, like, what could I do? You know, and it's, rather than doing something generic as wrestling and kind of making up generic wrestlers, that would never float. It really wouldn't, you know, you'd have a difficulty of creating all the artwork, the illustration material for that. It's it's a lot of work. So I thought about, what if you took this same mechanic and put it into like a political arena and do something kind of like what I showed you there as a glimpse? And I'm thinking about kind of making a crowdsourcing action, thing put together, but it's a matter of getting the sponsorship. And was it the fact that the game was popular because it was totally just wrestling, or was it the mechanics and something about that? Could you actually do that with other characters that weren't World Wrestling, licensed characters? Mm-hmm. So using the same mechanics, I have been working on something that I would like to launch, and it's a situation as trying to find interest. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today. And I said, hey, if you guys are interested, I'll give you a little splash about that and answer all your questions about the ancient history of Raw Deal.
Well, are you going to, now that we have this out here, are you going to post anything online for people to take a glimpse of what you've been working on here?
Yeah, there on my Facebook page, and in connection to that, there have been a few of these images have been kind of put out there. And a number of the guys that work with me in playtesting have looked at this. And one of the big things that we have a problem is that if you're going to use real people, you have to have either drawn pictures of them, and you can't use the photographs that are commonly available. So that's one of the bigger hurdles of how do I represent this. And you can use political figures, you can use their names or what have you, and there's a lot out there to be used, especially if you kind of change it around a little bit. Is there enough interest, like a player like you, that's like, oh, I've been playing Raw Deal for a while. The publisher came out with another version of the game. It's not exactly wrestling, mm-hmm. but it's got the same feel and flavor, and it's something new. It's actually got some rule changes. It's been kind of slimmed down a little bit because one of the gaming design or the game design features is, if I was going to put this out again, I'd like to make it for a slightly broader market, mm-hmm. And much like we did the first time around when we didn't want to have a lot of complexity for the wrestling fans, I think it needs to be streamlined a little bit more for the general audience, because let's face it, if we can get this into like a Target or a larger store, that might actually kind of, especially around like, election time, you might find some people that might buy it, but then, the people that are hardcore gamers, they're the ones that are going to kind of keep it going, much like you guys have done with, the fact that you've kept Raw Deal alive online with the virtual sets. And that way there's a culmination of some tournament support, because let's face it, the comic game shops were in a severe decline towards the end of when this game kind of ended in 2008 or 9. It was one of the support areas where all those local little stores that used to do tournaments for us, they made a mint. But there's not that many stores out there now, so I don't know. Now that I've gotten older and I'm not gaming as much, and I don't go to those places, where do you guys go to game and what have you? Do you do it all online? Do you do it virtually now?
Like right now, we still go to our local shop, but a lot of it's done on a program, Lackey CCG, where you have to manually do everything, your overturns, your hand drawing. It's not the most accessible for everyone, but I mean, like, our next event is this Saturday, and we're running it on my kitchen table.
Well, there you go. It's a situation where I think that Raw Deal, it had its day, and now a lot of games like Hearthstone's game that they have with all of their characters from what was originally what was it? The original
World of Warcraft.
World of Warcraft, their original card game. It's like a streamed down, version of their game, and that's made a lot of money. And it's like they are able to kind of functionally do that because they invested a lot of time into the characters for their other games, and it's just an additional product that they put out. To do something online with Raw Deal would have been great. It would have helped you guys, especially if you live in different corners and niches, around the world. We made a lot of friends with guys from Singapore, from Chile, from Great Britain, that were friends from the Midwest that I basically had been in touch with, through all these years. And the internet was a big part of the success of Raw Deal, and it could have been much more if we were able to have gone to an online format. So the gaming market has definitely changed out there, and it's interesting to hear that you guys are keeping Raw Deal alive in the facets. I've been meaning to get out to Gen Con a couple times, but a couple of the guys tell me, but there's some tournaments that are being run by a couple of the guys from Team Canada, and I've checked in with them a couple of times, and so I hear a little bit of dribs and drabs of what goes on with Raw Deal, now and then.
And it's funny you mentioned Singapore and Chile. Like, those are two large followings for the game still. One of the larger Facebook groups online is Raw Deal SG, where he posts alternate arts for cards, writes card articles for Revolution Superstars. Mm-hmm. Chile, they still run Classic, and they even run their own fantasy sets. They don't even play with the Team Canada Online virtual stuff. They're making their own things. So the Raw Deal has such an outreach in the world still, and much like you were able to, I'm talking with people from around the world and befriending these guys, and it's amazing what wrestling can do, because wrestling is such has such a close fan base. Like, the fans are passionate about wrestling, so you bring a card game into it, you're even making such a smaller pocket that you can't help but want to befriend and talk to these people.
Oh yeah, it's funny how whenever I've gone to Gen Con, you see a lot of different games that are out there that, game designers want to put together something with a wizard or what have you, because they think it's a cool idea. It could be a great game, but some of the best games never go anywhere because it's usually the property. It's like the Star Wars. Star Wars could put out the most complete amount of junk out there, and it sells like hotcakes because it's Star Wars. Mm-hmm. World Wrestling, part of the success that we had was due to the fact that it was the property. Fans just go to it, they're attracted to it, and it's, the quality of the material that we got. We had a lot of material. Since I knew that the photography was there, it was a matter of part of what I think that I was never really a wrestling fan, but I loved about the fact that was all these different name maneuvers were really what was kind of cool about wrestling. And I was always looking for like a glossary of some sort to see whatever some of these moves are, because when you were writing stuff back when I worked there, you needed to kind of identify what the moves were, but there was really nothing to go to. So part of this was, hey, these are a number of maneuvers. These are what damage they do. That was one of the integral factors of, unlike, this is a squirrel or this is a dragon or this is an elf. From Magic, these were, hey, this is a suplex. This is, kind of all sorts of different maneuvers that you would throw at your opponent. And by the time we got through about 3 or 4 sets, Baron's like, I don't think we have any more maneuvers, Mike. I'm like, I know, well, we're going to have to do something. So some of the ones, one of the funniest ones was like clutch onto opponent with the picture, and some of the ones, a couple of the guys, they'll remember some of the stuff. There was one, always a maneuver that I would put in that was sort of homophobic. There was always like the reach around. There was always something that we would put in that would always get the guys kind of go, like what you're doing now, like laughing, going, oh, I can't believe they did this. So we'd always come up with something that just would kind of be like the understated fact that, like, hey, you like wrestling? That's kind of gay. It's like, no, not really. It's just that they're wrestling and it might seem kind of gay. So when we did the Billy and Chuck set, couple of the guys out in the Midwest, they came up to me. They were in a tag team tournament. They dressed as Billy and Chuck, and they had their decks and pink sleeves, and it was hilarious. And they had, here you're at Gen Con in a gaming convention, and the guys that would just dress up and play the decks that they were playing was what you were talking about, was, just the camaraderie of the players getting together, having a good time, immersing themselves in the kind of almost like the role playing of the game. It wasn't a role playing game, but everybody just kind of liked the connection that they had with the game itself. So you don't see people dressing up as like wizards going to the Magic convention and doing that. They're hardcore. They got to get in there. They got to win. They want tournament stuff. So I think that Brian Whitty, one of our early champions, I keep in touch with him, and he was just a really interesting guy because he had said, I don't know anything about wrestling, but he goes, this game, I love the subtleties of it. And he goes, the people are just great to play with. He he came from the Midwest. He didn't have a lot of connections to other game people. And through this, he made like a lot of friends. And he was one of our dominant tournament players for a long time. And everybody liked him. Can you say that about some of the Magic tournament people? They are sometimes known as being extreme, hard-ass, tough dudes that just are not very friendly. So that environment culminated friendships. A couple of people got married. They met a couple of people at the convention. Some people, became good friends, and it changed a number of people's lives. So that was when it was kind of weird. Where Barry and I'm like, wow, this is just a game. You come out with a game, but it definitely has a longer-lasting effect, and that kind of was what we felt. Geez, this was worth the effort, because there were times where we kind of figured, oh, this. After about 7-8 sets, you kind of go, I think it's kind of played out. But Comic Images was like, hey, the money train is rolling. Let's keep it going. And we're like, well, what are we coming up with this time? So we'd always come up with something. And I think I did my part on making a number of problems numerous times. Like Baron said, we can't really, we'll allow one pre-match card. And I'm like, well, why can't we have 3, Baron? I'm like, we put all these cards out and we can only put 1 out. I'm like, come on. Okay. Then we upped it. We kept upping it through several sets. And so I just remember Mark LaRoche. He was sitting here a couple of times. He's one of our playtesters. And he would just we would show him stuff. And he was like a computer. He'd be like, okay, I'll put this card in. He would assemble his pre-match deck immediately to counter what you would try to put out. If you put some stupid So towards the end, it was like those type of guys made it very, very difficult for just general players to play the game. And they kind of got the effect that Mike Canoe felt when we introduced new stuff, that it was like putting your hand into a buzzsaw, and then towards the end, it was only a lot of heavy-duty tournament people. When we went from like 200 to 300 people at tournaments in the summer down to 40 to 50 people. And it was not due to the fact that people didn't like the game. It was just, it turned into something that some of the average players just couldn't contend with. Got very complicated towards the end.
And then a big thing with the pre-match disruption goes to those early tournament kits that had those title belts. Like the United States title belt was a big problem in the pre-match phase, with calling you out in old school. What was the idea behind making these kind of must-have cards, like Vince McMahon guest ringside announcer, Big Show guest ringside announcer? What was the idea behind making these meta cards only available to the tournament winners, and that just kind of kept adding on to that issue of these top players continue to be the top players, unless you're willing to shell out $50-$70 for one essential card?
Yeah, that was one of the things that was a problem that we kind of overlooked it, and then we wanted to give, because it's terrible when you go to a tournament or if you go somewhere and you pay money and you get like this special tournament card and it's like a common. It's like, oh, great. It's a foil version of a card I already got. Oh, big whoop. We wanted to give people something good. And the problem when doing that is that you come out with something like you're saying, which becomes too much of a meta game changer, and it was a shifter. And that was a mistake on our part. I think we overlooked it. We also kind of wanted to, we really wanted to help the people that were running the tournaments and those kits to get people to drive them to the stores where they can make money. Because after all, Barron was an original comic shop owner. He basically made most of his money at that shop by running tournaments. So he knew the mechanics of, like, if you're going to give me something crappy in this kit, I'm not going to get anybody to sign up, or they're going to eventually kind of turn away. So I think it was a matter of calibrating that a little better. And we tried to give the people that played it had no problem. It was the people that didn't have it, they kind of, like you were saying, became the outsiders. And that was a problem.
And the signature cards and DVDs, adding those to the tournament kits as random prizing, it worked really well in our area, especially me, because I'm an autograph junkie. Was there much involved getting 200 copies of one card signed by a wrestler? Like, what's the story behind that one?
That one, like that was a better prize because, like you could give that out in the kits and it wasn't really a big game changer. And like for you guys that really wanted to get the autographs, that was a big thing. And they are perpetually, I think, now one of the highest cost cards if you try to find them online or what have you, because they're pretty rare because they were very limited on the number that we could get of them. I'm trying to remember because we would send in the requests because it was a situation where we'd have to get the cards printed, send them out, who we're going to get for these kits. And that was pretty much handled by Comic Images at that time. They were kind of orchestrating all of the kits over there. And Zev Schlossinger, who was working at Comic Images, he was instrumental in getting and handling a lot of those kits. And it was a situation where I didn't manage a lot of that. I more or less kind of just oversaw like who we were getting, who we could get mixed in there. And it was a situation where that was a big hit. They liked those cards. And it was one of those things that I think Alan at Comic Images at the time would kind of, he'd moan or groan about, well, we don't have enough, tournament, signature. We can't put out enough kits because we don't have enough. They'd have to kind of delay a little bit. There was a little bit of a grind on getting those out, I remember. Because you're asking guys to sit down and sign a bunch of cards. You could get, the funny thing is you could get the lower rung card guys like, oh, let's see. That's Al Snow. Al will sign up like 100 of them for you, 200 for it. Like Triple H, here's 5. There you go. So, and I also was losing a lot of my connections to World Wrestling as they were going through staffing changes over there. So I would be able to rely on people that I knew to get us stuff. But as the staffing changed, it became a little bit more difficult to kind of get what I needed from them. So that was another, part that kind of played into that.
I want to go back to the more inappropriate cards as well. With Go Behind came to mind as well. But how did you guys get the okay for hitting the G spot?
I don't remember. I think there was a time there, Eric, where I would, especially like in the beginning or the middle of the history of the game, I could make stuff up and I could kind of convolute it to be sort of wrestling sounding. And at World Wrestling, we'd send it in for approvals and they would be like, oh, that's just, Mike's game. Don't worry about it. He knows all about the rules and regulations. And I wasn't doing anything that was taboo. It was stuff that was kind of, tongue in cheek that you'd see on TV. And we were able to get it through. What transpired after that, like I said, with the nip slip at the Super Bowl, that's when the Iron Curtain fell. And they were going through everything with a fine tooth comb. And they're like, whoa, you can't say that. Like you saw it, you did it on TV this weekend. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, we can't allow that out because that's too racy. So a lot of the latter portion, I'd say the last quarter of the game became a little bit less flavorful with some of the wrestling stuff because we weren't allowed to do some of the the spicy titles or what have you. And I think it might have been around like when Divas came out, I kind of pushed it a lot. I wouldn't be nominated for Supreme Court judge now with some of the stuff that I had put into that set with some of the titles and things. They'd be like, oh, back in 2006, Mr. Foley, I think you came out with a card that had hitting the G-spot. So I think my days in the political arena are pretty much cinched up by having been involved with that operation. So, some of the stuff I thought was fun. We had, we always tried to push the envelope with that because we knew, and also meeting and running into the kids at the conventions, they were always like, oh man, I can't believe you came out with this card. And, I had worked in the photo department, so I pushed those guys, and Frank Vitucci, who worked in the photo department, he'd be like, "Oh no, not another raw deal set," because I would push him for the photos, and it was like not just the maneuvers. There was always some of the stuff that would come up that like sometimes I think if I go back through the sets, I can always find like, oh geez, that picture doesn't match. But we tried to get some stuff that was pretty funny that kind of fit in there. That was part of one of the real things that I kind of enjoyed working on in the game. And it was a situation, I think, where we had a bunch of cards where we worked all the people that kind of, either play testers or different people into a number of the different cards. Baron finally got on one of the cards, but it was funny how many of the cards that have people that were playtesters. No, I don't think any of them. I can't remember if any of them were really very popular or used. They almost became almost like throwaways because I had photoshopped a lot of the guys into the crowd and different things like that. So there was a bunch of. I used to do a lot more Easter eggs back in the day when I had time.
Well, after the Iron Curtain went down, was there anything that you wish you got into the game? Any Elkhart Elements? Maybe not necessarily because of WWE cutting it off, but maybe playtesting even didn't allow for that design to be put into the game.
The only thing I oftentimes felt that when we brought in Zev was not that familiar with the game, and he independently made a couple of rulings on a couple of the cards, like Oversoul Maneuver and a couple other things they just kind of changed how we kind of ruled certain stuff. And I think that oftentimes as designers, you want to kind of put certain stuff out there, and we more or less would playtest it one way. And as it kind of came out in the environment, other people would kind of interpret it a little bit differently. So we ended up having some cards that became very convoluted. And some of the mechanics caused a lot of rule problems for people. And I just remember, maintain hold or and things like that with some of the submission maneuvers with clutch onto opponent and things like that. They just became very convoluted. And we had a lot of cards that Baron insisted on saying, okay, there's a difference between something that can be reversed or cannot be reversed. And there was a lot of that subtle nuances. And I was like, well, we originally had plunging, which you'd plunge somebody's fortitude so they couldn't reverse it. That was basically the way you did it. You just shoved their fortitude down to a number that they couldn't reverse. Mm. And we had a lot of fans that said that was a negative play experience, where I was like, well, then we got into the gray area of what can be reversed and what couldn't be reversed. So there was a lot of those mechanics, which I thought further complicated the game with certain technical rulings, and people became rules lawyers on things. So I always came out with stuff that I thought that would be kind of fun or something new. And I remember when we came out with the GMs, you had all these selections of different enforcers, and Baron knew right off the bat that was probably going to be a problem, but he liked the idea of the strategy involved with it. So I would come up with ideas that were a problem, and Baron wouldn't say no. He would just be like, I can see the strategy in that. And other playtesters would be like, no, don't let Mike do that. And then Baron would be like, we can work around it. We can make it happen. So it was a situation where I was pretty much, at fault for convoluting the game as much as some of the other implementation of how we did rulings incorrectly, as it kind of progressed, So I don't think there was anything that I was really aching to put into the game. I remember Baron, when we had some of, I'm trying to remember them all now. We had the shoot maneuvers, and we had, there was a wrestler, there was a submit, we had to have kind of like rock, paper, scissors. One will reverse the other. This one will beat that. And Baron only had two of them. And I'm like, okay, we got to have another one that kind of is like the paper beats rock kind of thing. So I remember some of those mechanics came about when you've exhausted a lot of the different facets of just the basics of the game. So I think that you put game designs out there and implement little subtleties on a new set, and you see how it kind of works. And I think that we had a pretty good run until it kind of just became all compact together, that it got kind of convoluted. And I think where I kind of really thought that a reset was necessary was when we came back with all the throwback cards. And Baron wanted to kind of fix a lot of really good titled cards that were no longer played, and we did throwbacks. Yeah. And so I can just remember Chain Shot and a couple others that were not good cards, and they turn into these game killers. And the throwbacks were really problematic. And I was like, we really should have had a reset, because that made it very, very complicated in a lot of the rulings on certain stuff. And I think that the throwbacks is an idea that kind of led us up to a peak. And then that was kind of the beginning of us kind of saying this needs to be fixed. And you guys still play the game, so I don't know what your opinion is and how you doctor stuff these days, but there was a lot of stuff that needed to be, kind of bandaged and maintained at times. And so it was easy to do when you're putting out a new set, but eventually you get to a point where it's kind of like Jenga. You can only build that stack so far. You get all the way up there, and eventually it's going to topple on you. You know.
And that's just with non-superstar specifics, where you weren't even able to support a lot of superstars because the WWE licensing wasn't there for those characters.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we always, and if a guy came back, all of a sudden it'd be like, oh, Baron would be like, hey, you know, they just re-signed so-and-so. So then we'd come back, we'd bring that guy a card and kind of get him back into the environment. And I tell you, there was all those guys out there that loved playing X-Pac. They were just like these people that were like, you know, they were like, you know, fanatics. They're like, I'm going to be X-Pac and I'm going to get into this. And they're like, they could qualify to get into the tournament and they'd get into the cut. And then they get the first game, they get eliminated from the cut. And it was like, Baron would be like, well, you're playing X-Pac. Don't you expect to get past the rest of these guys? But Baron would always be like very, very happy that if someone showed up with something that was kind of a convoluted deck and make it into the finals, you know, he'd always kind of give them some sort of like additional prize. So he had a big fan following, and I don't know. One thing I should say, that I know some people don't know about Baron's, you know, eventual passing. They probably know he passed away and what have you. But the situation is that he was a very modest guy about his health, and he didn't tell me for the longest time that he wasn't doing too well. I kind of got, you know, indications that he wasn't doing well, but he had cancer. It's one of those things that I think a lot of you guys that are younger, you know, you don't take care of your health. You might do things that you think you're Superman and what have you. But I think that Baron kind of exhibited one thing that was like, you know, you really need to take better care of yourself. And, you know, he was a great guy. I really missed him, you know, and it's terrible that we lost him at, you know, the age of like 36. But he did certain things with his lifestyle that you should, and a lot of gamers, sometimes I see them at conventions, you know, they may be overweight. They might not eat well. You know, you really need to kind of take care of yourself and realize that, you know, you're not Superman. And the situation is that we don't know what transpired with Baron, but he was a big diet soda drinker and he didn't exercise. He originally had put on a lot of weight because he had a car accident when he was younger that messed his knee up. And if you're 6'8" and you can weigh 400 pounds, he didn't really look that bad. You know, he was like a banner walking around the tournament hall. Everybody could see him. He was like traveling with Shrek. I remember looking back when we were going to some of the Gen Con conventions, and he'd be sitting a seat or two behind me. I'd look back, and Baron's head was above the seats. No one's head is above the seat. It's like traveling with Shrek. Hey, Mike, how you doing? And Baron, I'm sitting back here. The guy was a gentle giant, and I do miss him. He was quite a character, and situationally, I felt bad that when we lost him, because I remember talking to him a couple of times, and I said, "Hey, Baron, maybe the treatment that your doctor has you on is a bit severe. Maybe you should take it easy." And he said, "Well, you know, I'm going by what the doctor had said," and he had a situation where he ended up in the hospital before the holidays. I think that was in 2007, and he was having trouble breathing. And then he seemed to be doing a little bit better. They had an operation. He had a big tumor under his neck, and the situation was that he had a lot of radiation treatment and chemo, and he was getting a little bit better, but it was really the treatment that put him away. It wasn't so much the cancer. It was he had lost a lot of weight, and it severely had beaten him up. And he was joking. He goes, "Mike, if this was you, you know, I lost more than you weigh." You know, so he had lost more weight, and till the end, he was always joking around. And I remember the last conversation online that I had with him, because he didn't want people to see him. I said, "Hey, you want me to come up and do something for you, or what have you, see your mom?" And he said, no. He goes, "I really don't want people to see me kind of like this." And I had written him an email saying, because Baron used to do a lot of other things besides watch wrestling. He was into poker and what have you, and he liked movies. And I remember the Academy Awards had been right around the time of his death. And I remember saying, "Geez, can you imagine that this No Country for Old Men movie had won compared to another movie that it was up against?" And I didn't get a reply. And a day and a half kind of went by, and his mom had gotten on. And she said, "Mike, I just wanted to let you know that we lost Baron. He had kind of a sudden downturn over that weekend, and he had gone into hospice, and he had quickly passed away." So, unfortunately, Baron, he really really enjoyed the group that he had from Raw Deal, and he relished all of the praise and interaction that he had with you guys. So we miss him a lot. A number of the people that had met him, they really feel like he was Raw Deal, and I'm glad that everybody kind of appreciated him, and he was a good friend, and I miss him a lot. And I feel that if he was still around, we probably, would have done something else, because it's difficult to create games on your own. Mm-hmm. And it's a situation where I've come up with a couple of different things, but when you had someone that you could bounce stuff off of, I thought that we were a pretty good team, because as much as a tournament guy he was, I was more, I came up with ideas, the graphics, and kind of managing the project. And I pretty much wanted to, I had to have him as somebody that kind of could help structure and keep it on a very, sophisticated, kind of more tournament level, and keep it going. And we both liked the wrestling, and it was a situation where we made a lot of good friends. And it was a venture that I have to, thank all the fans, because they helped me pay off my mortgage. And it was a situation where it's one of those things where when you do something that's a hobby and you do it and it becomes kind of your job, at times it became a bit of a grind. But the fact that all the people that played it really appreciated the game and kind of, appreciated what we did, it made it all worthwhile,
And let's wrap it up on that note. We're nearing an hour here, and I just wanted to share briefly like my favorite Baron memory. I haven't had interactions with him, but we did the WWE. They had the fantasy draft through WWE proper for a while, and he won it one season. And it's like the small pockets of us are like, oh, we know who that is. We know who that is. And not that the game needed credibility, not that Raw Deal did, but it felt even more special seeing his name on the top of the WWE this fantasy game.
Yeah,
it was something else to see that on there.
Oh yeah, I mean. The fact that Baron, I think he actually came down to the card group after he would run and close his card shop, because he knew that I worked at World Wrestling, and he heard I was in this other card shop playing, and he wanted to kind of, become buddies with me. So it was kind of one of those things where, he was quite a character, and, he was somebody who, became pretty much embedded with the game,
So, Mike, what are you up to these days? Are you developing any other games aside from your other project here? Do you have any other engines you're working on, or
Yes, I have a couple of times tried to do something else with Raw Deal. I have a bowling game that I didn't bring it up here. I could have flashed that in front of you too. That I put together, which is kind of a bowling tin. It was one of those things where it was kind of a takeoff on a couple of movies that were out there that I thought that were kind of like fan favorites. And it would be a situation where there's a lot of people that bowl, there's a lot of people that like wrestling stuff. And it's a matter of kind of getting that crowdsourced or finding a publisher to kind of do this. Because a lot of times nowadays, it seems as though it's very difficult to kind of get a niche into the market and produce something unless you do something crowdsourcing and get people that, it's a good way to use it, but you got to get everything pretty much up to a publishing point, and then get a lot of fans that you have out there and say, hey, would you buy this if I publish it? Mm-hmm. So getting to that next couple of steps with a couple of these games are kind of like what I'm working on. And they're back burners because I'm a freelance graphic designer by day, and I've been doing that for years. I had a number of clients that have kept me busy doing that in my my 30-year career in graphics. So that's primarily what I've been doing. But I had a lot of fun doing Raw Deal, and I wanted to kind of re-implement something else. And I kind of missed the interaction with the players. That was a key part of developing the game.
Well, so I mean, if you want to interact with the players, there's the WWE Raw Deal Facebook page that's pretty active, and you see guys like Brian Whitty on there, and a lot of those older players and players coming into the game new, wondering, how do I get into this? How do I find starter decks? And it's like, well, it's going to be a little harder to find that stuff, but it's available if you're willing to look for it. So is there anything that you would like to plug and promote, get some eyes on the games you've been working on? What would you like to close up with?
Well, I was going to say, one of the reasons I did want to talk to you was that I would like to find out if there was interest in a revamp of something that's kind of a trumped up deal, like Raw Deal. because we could have some people out there that there might be like a media, kind of like a media. Put that on the camera there. Media stars. We could have some media stars. We could have the supreme leader.
Oh, Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un. But you saw Putin. We can show him again.
These are the raw deal superstar cards. You designed everything, so it looks like they belong in a starter deck.
The original version, not the. And then you have Mr. President, and the president always he's got things like fire and fury.
Oh, it's a maneuver card. Oh, and it's still the high risk. I'm getting a very celebrity deathmatch vibe from all of this.
It's sometimes you want to grab them by the PY. So there's a lot of superstar specifics, and the game is kind of based around the same type of maneuvers. Rather than a step aside, you're thick-skinned. So you're working with things that are based around maneuvers, and sometimes you have you might have a guy who is like a president who could put in cards that are congressional. Mm-hmm. So you have congressional people in there. So there's a possibility that this could become a reality if there are people out there that are interested in playing a game that's not WWE specific. And it uses the same specifics of Raw Deal, except rather than having a Backlash deck, which kind of convoluted the game, this has a limitation on 3 card plays per turn. Mm-hmm. So there are cards in here that allow you to take another turn or do other card plays within a given turn. So there's mechanics that are kind of fleshed out in here. Some of the decks are based around certain types of attacks. Some of them are based. Trump is basically built around a huge hand because it's all about hand size with him. And everything that he has to have is bigger. So the situation is these are 4 superstars. There's the possibility I would like to get another presidential candidate in there, but who's actually going to take him on in the election? So time will tell. Because I want to make use of those congressional cards that are built in there, because nice use and manipulation of all those politicians is a big part of the game.
I think you're missing one of Trump's big rivals right now, and that's Justin Trudeau.
Well, Trudeau is actually on. He's in here. He's in here, my friend. Let's see if I can find him. If you got just a minute, he's actually on one of the cards that Trump he's treating. Hang on there. Don't go anywhere, folks. Let me find this for you a minute. See if I got it in here.
Like a perfect feud would be NAFTA. You can, if it's played against Trudeau or Trump, there could be a good effect there.
It's a situation where, let me find this card for you since you mentioned Trudeau. Here we go. You want to drop a veiled compliment or insult. A veiled insult. There he is. Trump is insulting your prime minister right there at the podium.
Oh, and you're even including all the flavor text of the old audio as well.
It is. It's high risk. It says, Canada, they make stuff. I love the Canucks. That hockey. It's like a pro sport.
So do you have any of these card images online or any rules where people can check out what you've been working on with this game?
Eric, what I did was I started to build a Facebook page. And if you looked up Trumped Up Deal over on Facebook over there, mm-hmm. You can find some of the card images over there. If people are interested, they could give me comments there and give me some feedback if they're anxious to see these. If they want to say, hey, I would sponsor and support that game if you were going to do kind of a Kickstarter or some sort of crowdsourcing, because that would give me a better idea of how many people would actually be interested. Because I'm actually going to meet with Alan Gordon from Comic Images. He had shoulder surgery, for all you people that don't know who the publisher of Raw Deal originally was. Alan Gordon was another big component of the game. He was the guy that dropped all the cash that produced the game for us. I'm going to talk to Alan about some financials and see what it would take to kind of do Trumped Up Deal and get it out there to you guys, because I think this gives us something just as flavorful as it's politics in the squared circle. We've got a situation here where there's plenty of material to work, and if you are a fan of Trump or not, you come to the table and you lay it on the line. You support your politician, you back them no matter what they say, okay? Or you abuse the media, you manipulate it the way you want.
When are you going to be having this meeting with Alan?
He had, like I said, he had shoulder surgery. I was going to try to meet with him this week. In fact, it was put off because of his problem with his shoulder. And it's going to be probably next week or as soon as he's feeling well. I wanted him to kind of bring me some specifics regarding just cost and what have you to kind of publish the game.
Well, what I'll do is this episode will air after your meeting. So I'll toss up the information on social media. I'll get it shared to all the Raw Deal players out there and get this game, because this is the first time I'm hearing of it, and I would love to get it out there because these are great mechanics you've developed to go with wrestling, and it's going to fit with anything that involves people beating up each other.
Yeah, it's something that I knew that you guys continued to play the game, and I wanted to kind of try to, carry on the tradition of doing something with Raw Deal. But without the license, it's very difficult to do something in wrestling, All
right, Mike. Well, thank you very much. We've hit just over an hour.
All right.
No, this is fantastic. It's such a great chat. Yeah, very much. A lot of information that you've been able to share with everyone. And I hope to have you on the show again in the future and follow up with some questions that I skipped this time.
Thanks.
Right.
Keep dropping the Raw Deal, guys. Keep dealing it.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.